The gala of pride, the chandeliers of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel's Crystal Hall, glowed with the brilliance of 100 glittering stars. It's their crystals, catching every spark of light and casting rainbows across polished marble floors. The air hummed with conversation, with laughter, with the sound of champagne glasses chiming in endless toasts to wealth, power, and ambition. The city's elite had gathered once more for their annual charity gala, a night where fortunes were flaunted. Under the thin veil of philanthropy, where reputations were paraded like gowns, and where influence was measured not in kindness, but in the number of powerful hands. One could shake before the night was through. At the center of it all stood Daniel Harrington. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably groomed, he carried himself with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of being admired. His tailored tuxedo fit as though stitched directly onto his frame. His platinum cufflinks caught the light at every calculated gesture, and his smile sharp. Self-satisfied never faltered as waves of people leaned in to bask in his presence. Daniel thrived in such spaces, not because he enjoyed the company, but because here, among polished laughter and whispered praise, his ego fed like a lion at a feast. Daniel had clawed his way to the top of the city's legal world, building his reputation as one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys money could buy. He was the man who dismantled companies, forced executives into submission, and rewrote contracts to his clients' advantage with cold precision. The corner office overlooking the skyline, the Porsche parked in the private garage, the string of magazine features labeling him a power player of the decade, all of it had become not just symbols of his success, but proof that his path, the one paved with ambition, strategy, and calculated cruelty, was the right one. Tonight, that truth radiated from him in every smirk, every raised glass, every whispered acknowledgement of his name. Beside him, her arm threaded through his like an accessory, was Cassandra Hale. Blonde, elegant, and perfectly polished, Cassandra came from an old money family whose fortune had been shrinking for decades, but whose name still carried weight in society's inner circles. For Daniel, she was the perfect partner, beautiful enough to turn heads, pedigreed enough to open doors, and shallow enough never to question the compromises he made to achieve his goals. Sandra spoke in smooth tones about vacations in Monaco and shopping trips in Paris, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier's glow as she smiled at everyone and everything, though her eyes never strayed far from Daniel. She knew her role. She played it flawlessly. The loyal ornament of a powerful man. The evening surged forward with the rhythm of speeches and auctions, of handshakes and carefully exchanged business cards. Daniel held court at the center of a group of eager listeners, recounting his latest courtroom victory with the flair of a seasoned storyteller. Every pause in his tale was met with laughter at precisely the right moment. Every conclusion with murmurs of admiration. He gestured with his champagne glass, as though it were a conductor's baton, orchestrating the reactions of his audience with practiced precision. The secret, he declared, his voice carrying just enough to reach a few nearby groups, is to understand your opponent's weakness and exploit it without mercy. Sentiment is a luxury for those who never win. Success belongs to those willing to make the hard choices. The crowd responded as he knew they would, nodding, murmuring agreement, their expressions reflecting envy and admiration in equal measure. He had them. He always did. He was Daniel Harrington, the man who never lost. Then, James Mitchell, his longtime friend and frequent partner in indulgence, nudged him sharply in the ribs. "Daniel," James whispered, his voice low but tinged with a strange excitement. "Don't look now, but I swear that's Alina over there by the silent auction tables." For a moment, Daniel's smile faltered. His glass hovered halfway to his lips, the golden champagne trembling inside. He turned his head casually, unwilling to let curiosity seem like weakness. But when his gaze fell upon the woman across the room, the name echoed in his chest like a long-forgotten song. Alina Morales, his ex-wife. She stood quietly by one of the auction displays, her posture graceful yet unassuming, as though she belonged and yet had no need to command attention. Her dark hair fell in soft waves across her shoulders, catching just a hint of light when she shifted to look at a painting. She wore a simple black dress, elegant in its understatement. one that Daniel's trained eye instantly dismissed as inexpensive, far beneath the couture gowns swirling around the room. She carried no diamonds, no luxury handbag, no visible signs of the wealth this crowd used as armor. Instead, she radiated a quiet calm, poise that did not require embellishment. Daniel's chest tightened with something he did not immediately recognize: discomfort. Maybe, or irritation. Lena was a chapter he had closed years ago when his ambitions had outgrown her modest dreams. She had been a dreamer, always sketching jewelry designs on scraps of paper, always speaking of opening her own boutique one day. She had believed in beauty, in creativity, in things that could not be measured by balance sheets or quarterly profits. To Daniel, it had been charming in their early years together. But as his career surged forward, her dreams had begun to look like chains. He had outgrown her. That was the story he told himself when he signed the divorce papers and walked away. Now seeing her here among the powerful and wealthy, dressed in simplicity, stirred the sharp edge of mockery on his tongue. His lips curled into a smirk, his confidence returning like armor slipping back into place. "Ah well," he murmured, loud enough for his circle to hear, his tone dripping with false pity. "Look who decided to crawl out from whatever small-town hole she's been hiding in." Cassandra's grip on his arm tightened slightly. "Is that her?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied Alina across the room. "The one who used to make those little trinkets?" Daniel laughed, sharp and cutting. Calling them trinkets is generous. Lena always lived in a fantasy world, thinking she could build a life out of beads and wire. She believed she could make a living selling jewelry at farmers' markets. For heaven's sake, I tried to save her from wasting her time, but she was stubborn. Look at her now, exactly where I predicted she'd end up. James leaned in, his voice tinged with curiosity. "What's she doing these days?" "Last I heard," Daniel said with satisfaction, she moved back in with her parents after the divorce. Tried to open a little boutique downtown still. Peddling her amateur jewelry to anyone gullible enough to buy it. Refuses to accept reality. It's pathetic, really. The group chuckled, feeding on the cruelty like sharks to blood. Their laughter fanned Daniel's ego, pushing him to lean harder into the mockery. "I actually did her a favor by ending things. Ouch. She was holding me back, dragging me down with her small-minded dreams. While I was building a career, she was wasting time pretending to be an artist. I tried to help her see the truth, but she insisted on living in that romantic little bubble of hers. Some people are just destined for mediocrity." Cassandra giggled on cue, her voice sharp as crystal. "How sad. Some women never learn to grow up." Daniel took a long sip of champagne, savoring not just the expensive liquid, but the intoxicating feeling of superiority. He looked again at Alina, standing alone, studying the auction items, as if she hadn't heard a word of his cutting remarks. Her composure irritated him. Why wasn't she shrinking, crumbling, showing the world the failure he had always believed her to be? Why did she look so at ease in a room where she clearly did not belong? "Look at her," Daniel scoffed, gesturing with his glass. "Still dressing like she shops at thrift stores, still carrying herself like she has something special to offer. The world. Sad, really, if it weren't so." But the rest of his words died in his throat. A hush spread across the ballroom, rolling like a tide from the grand entrance to the farthest corners of the hall. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Laughter cut short. Even the string quartet stumbled in their melody as every head turned toward the doors. Daniel's group followed the movement, confusion flickering across their faces as the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Through the golden arch of the entrance, a figure appeared. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that seemed woven from wealth itself, his presence was commanding without a single word. The whispers began immediately, carrying across the hall like wind through leaves. Alexander Royce, the billionaire, the enigma. The man whose name graced magazines, whose empire spanned technology, hospitality, and global trade, but who appeared in public so rarely that his presence was itself a spectacle. Daniel felt his heart skip. Alexander Royce was not just rich. He was untouchable, his influence reaching beyond industries and into governments. To be acknowledged by Royce was the kind of validation men like Daniel dreamed of all their lives. It rehearsed in his mind. Countless times what he might say if he ever stood face to face with such power. But his rehearsals did not prepare him for what happened next. The woman they underestimated when Alina Morales left Daniel Harrington's apartment for the last time. The city outside had been alive with light and noise, but inside her chest everything felt dim, hollow, and unbearably quiet. She carried only 2 suitcases, one filled with clothes and the other with sketchbooks, tools, and a box of unfinished jewelry pieces that had once been her lifeline during long nights of hope. There had been no dramatic fight, no storm of tears. Just Daniel's cold finality, his voice stripped of affection as he explained that her dreams were childish, her ambitions a burden, her presence incompatible with the empire he was determined to build. "I can't carry dead weight, Elena," he had said with the clinical tone he usually reserved for adversaries in the courtroom. Those words etched themselves into her memory more deeply than any legal contract he had ever drafted. She moved into a modest apartment above, florist's shop, in one of the city's quieter districts. The place smelled perpetually of lilies. In damp soil, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and the radiators groaned each winter. But it was hers. In the evenings, after finishing her shifts at a small boutique downtown where she earned little more than minimum wage, Alina would climb the narrow staircase, set her sketchbooks out on the kitchen table, and work late into the night. Her neighbors heard the faint tink of metal against pliers, the soft scrape of files smoothing silver edges, and the occasional sigh when a design refused to come to life. She made necklaces and bracelets from wire, semi-precious stones, and silver she purchased in tiny quantities from a supplier who gave her discounted scraps. Friends urged her to give up. "You're wasting your time," one said gently over. "Coffee. You're talented, sure, but talent doesn't pay rent. Find something stable." Others were harsher. Daniel was right. "What? Dreams are for kids. You're an adult. Grow up." Lena listened politely, but returned to her table each night, hands steady, eyes focused. To her, creating was not a luxury. It was survival. It was proof that she had not been erased by Daniel's rejection, proof that she still had something of her own worth holding on to. The boutique owner, a middle-aged woman named Teresa, noticed Elena's sketches one afternoon when she pulled a crumpled design from her apron pocket. Teresa frowned at first. Her store was full of imported accessories. Nothing handmade, nothing risky. But after persuasion, she allowed Elena to display a few of her pieces in a corner of the shop. Tucked between racks of scarves, Elena remembered the trembling of her hands when she placed her first necklace on the small velvet stand. For days, nothing happened. Customers passed by, glancing but never stopping. Elena nearly removed the display in humiliation, and then one afternoon a woman paused. She lifted the necklace, studied its intricate silver vines woven around a single amethyst stone, and smiled. "How much?" "How?" she asked. When Teresa told her, the woman pulled out her wallet without hesitation. Elena stood frozen, unable to breathe. Her first sale was not about the money, it was about validation, a stranger's recognition that her work had value. That night she cried, not from sadness but from a release of everything she had carried since Daniel's cruel dismissal. But victories were small and sporadic. Most days she sold nothing. She walked home exhausted, her shoes worn thin, her fingers blistered, and her account balance so low she often chose between paying the electric bill or buying better materials. She skipped meals, cut corners, and told herself over and over that this was only a season, that perseverance would bloom into something brighter. It was during one such season, in the chill of early autumn, that fate decided to intervene. Elena was working late in the boutique, rearranging displays while Teresa locked up, when the small bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, ready to apologize that they were closing, but froze when she saw the man who entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair silvered not by weakness, but by the authority of age and experience. His suit was tailored yet unpretentious, his eyes sharp yet softened by a kind of quiet curiosity. He moved through the store not like the city's typical elite, who strode as though they owned the ground beneath their feet, but like a man searching for something meaningful in a world that often offered only noise. His gaze drifted across the displays until it landed on the small stand holding Elena's jewelry. He paused, reached out, and carefully lifted one of her pieces. It was a bracelet of interwoven silver strands, delicate yet strong, with a single sapphire stone set at the clasp. "This is unusual," he said, his voice low and resonant, directed toward Elena, though he did not yet look at her. "Who designed it?" Elena hesitated, uncertain whether to admit it. Her instinct was to downplay, to protect herself from ridicule, but something in his tone, genuine interest, not mockery, gave her courage. "I did," she said softly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. He looked at her then, truly looked, and something shifted in his expression. "You," his brow furrowed as though he were piecing together a puzzle. "Tell me about this design."
What were
"You trying to say with it?" The question startled her. No one had ever asked her that before. Customers either bought or dismissed her pieces, but no one had cared about the story behind them. She swallowed, then explained. "The strands represent paths of life, separate but always crossing, always intertwining. The sapphire is the constant hope, or maybe love, depending on how you see it. I wanted it to feel fragile, but also unbreakable." The man turned the bracelet over in his hand, studying it with the intensity of someone evaluating more than metal and stone. "Fragile yet unbreakable," he repeated, almost to himself. Then he glanced back at her, and for the first time his smile appeared, small but real. "That is not the language of commerce. That is the language of an artist." Elena's heart fluttered, unsure whether to accept the words as praise or as another kind of test. Before she could respond, Teresa re-entered from the back and recognized him instantly. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, "Mr. Rusai," didn't realize Elena turned sharply. "Mr. Rusai." The man extended his hand, his manner calm. "Alexander Royce," he said simply. The name struck Elena like thunder. Everyone knew of him, though few had seen him in person. A billionaire investor, one of the most influential men in the nation. His empire stretched across industries, yet his public appearances were rare, his reputation cloaked in mystery. Alexander. Royce was holding her bracelet. "I'll take this one," he said, placing it gently on the counter. "And whatever else she has designed?" "All of it." Lena blinked, thinking she had misheard. "All of it, yes?" His gaze met hers with quiet certainty. "These are not trinkets. They're stories in silver. They deserve more than a dusty." Corner in a shop, he reached into his jacket, withdrew a card, and slid it across the counter. "Come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk about your future." The bell chimed again as he left, the door closing softly behind him. For a long moment, the shop was silent, except for Elena's uneven breathing. She stared at the card on the counter, her name trembling on her lips. Alexander Royce. Tomorrow. For the first time in years, hope surged so fiercely inside her chest that she had to grip the counter to steady herself. She did not yet know what this meant or where it would lead, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the world had just shifted. The dreams Daniel mocked, the ones she had nearly abandoned, had been seen and valued by someone who mattered, and that someone was Alexander Royce. Sterling dreams turned real the next morning. Elena barely slept. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. Alexander Royce's calm, steady eyes, the weight of his words. The card he had left behind like a key to some hidden door she had always longed to open. She stared at it on her kitchen table as dawn broke through the curtains. Simple lettering: his name, his office address, a direct number glowing in the pale light as though it carried more gravity than a legal contract. For years, her sketches had been dismissed, her designs mocked, her spirit tested. And now, with a single encounter, a billionaire had declared her work not only valid, but extraordinary. Hope, for so long a fragile ember, now blazed so brightly inside her that it frightened her by the time she arrived at the Royce Global headquarters. Her hands trembled despite her best efforts to appear calm. The building rose above the financial district, like a fortress of glass and steel, every pane reflecting the morning sun until it looked like a monument carved out of light. She walked through the revolving doors into a lobby so vast it felt more like a cathedral than an office. Its marble floors polished to a mirror shine, its air humming with quiet efficiency. Suited professionals moved with purpose, their conversations clipped and sharp, while screens along the walls flashed stock updates and headlines about global markets. Alina felt the weight of her thrift store shoes on the marble, the modest cut of her dress among designer suits, and for a fleeting moment, Daniel's cruel voice returned. You don't belong here. This isn't your world. But then she touched the sketchbook in her bag and steadied herself. Her world was wherever her art lived, and her art was here, in her hands. In the designs that no one had managed to extinguish, a receptionist guided her to the top floor, where she was ushered into an office that took her breath away. It wasn't ostentatious, no, gold-plated ornaments, or overwhelming displays of wealth. Instead, it was expansive and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Shelves lined with books and art pieces, and a desk of dark wood that seemed to anchor the room with its simplicity. Alexander Royce stood by the window, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, studying the skyline as though it were a painting he had commissioned himself. Miss Morales, he said, turning toward her with that same calm composure that had unsettled her the night before. I'm glad you came. Alina sat, clutching her sketchbook like armor. She expected a negotiation, a formal pitch, perhaps a demand for proof of her worth. Instead, Alexander surprised her. He asked about her story, not just the jewelry, but her journey, her struggles, her dreams. His questions were not perfunctory. They were precise, probing, as though he wanted to see the person behind the sketches, not just the designs themselves. And so, haltingly at first, Alina told him everything. She spoke of her childhood love of crafting with beads her grandmother had given her, of the way sketching designs had helped her survive the loneliness of adolescence, of the years she had spent with Daniel believing her passion could coexist with his ambition. She confessed to the humiliation of divorce, the long nights above the florist's shop, the blistered fingers and empty pockets, the moments when she had almost given up. Her voice shook at times, but she did not hide. She spoke with the honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. Alexander listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable but not cold. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by the weight of reliving it all, he leaned forward slightly. You know what I see when I hear your story? He asked. Alina shook her head. I see resilience, he said simply. I see an artist who refused to let the world silence her. And I see potential not just for beauty, but for a business built on authenticity. That, he added, his voice deepening with conviction, is rare. The market is flooded with luxury. Brands that sell status but no soul. Your work has soul. Oh, that is why it will endure. She blinked, stunned. For years she had heard only Daniel's voice, impractical, childish, impossible. Now here was one of the most powerful men in the country telling her the exact opposite. Alexander continued, his tone shifting from personal to practical. I don't invest in passing fancies. I invest in people who have the vision and the perseverance to build something lasting. I want to back your jewelry line, not as a hobby, but as a global brand. If you are willing, we can make Morales Treasures a name known far beyond this city. Lena's breath caught. She had imagined selling more pieces at boutiques, perhaps one day opening her own small store. Never had she dared dream of global recognition. Her hands trembled again, but this time from awe rather than fear. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Alexander smiled faintly. Of course you can. You've already done the hardest part. You believed when no one else did. The rest is simply scaling that. Ms. Morales is where I come in. That meeting marked the turning point. Within weeks, with Alexander's backing, Alina was introduced to networks of artisans, suppliers, and marketers she had never imagined she would meet. Royce Global provided seed funding, legal protections, and infrastructure. But Alina remained the heart of the operation. She sketched designs at her kitchen table just as she always had, but now her sketches were transformed into prototypes. By skilled craftsmen, her pieces displayed in glossy showrooms. her brand name whispered at fashion events and trade shows. It was not easy, as the weight of expansion pressed heavily on her shoulders. She faced skepticism from seasoned executives who doubted a novice artist could handle the demands of international markets. She wrestled with production errors, late shipments, and endless nights revising designs to meet deadlines. Where once she had felt alone, she now had a team-man behind that team, Alexander's unwavering belief in her vision. He was not a man who showered her with empty praise. Rather, he challenged her, asked the hard questions, pushed her to refine, to define, to own her artistry as more than sentiment. And slowly, Morales's treasures became more than just jewelry. It became a story. Each collection carried a theme drawn from Elena's own journey, roots and wings. Inspired by her grandmother's advice to always honor where she came from while daring to soar, line to line using. Broken stones reforged into unique settings, a reflection of resilience after loss. Threads of light, pieces that captured the interplay of fragility and strength, echoing the very words she had once said to Alexander about fragile yet unbreakable bonds. Fashion magazines began to take notice. An actress wore one of Elena's necklaces to a film premiere, and within days, sales inquiries flooded their website. A royal family member was photographed in one of her bracelets at a charity function. And suddenly, Morales's treasures was being discussed in circles Elena had once only read about in glossy magazines. What had begun as scraps of silver and midnight sketches was now a phenomenon spreading across continents. And through it all, Elena remained grounded. She still lived above the florist's shop for months, long after she could have afforded a penthouse, because the creaking floorboards reminded her of the nights she had nearly quit. She still worked late into the night, not because she had to, but because she loved the act of creating. Success, she discovered, was not about proving Daniel wrong, or even about proving herself right. It was about giving life to beauty in a world that desperately needed it. Alexander watched her transformation with a quiet pride that rarely showed in his public dealings. He attended her first major showcase, where buyers and critics alike applauded her collection, and when she accepted an award for Emerging Designer of the Year, he was in the front row, his eyes shining with the satisfaction of someone who had placed a bet not on profits, but on a soul. And when the invitation arrived for the Grand Metropolitan Charity Gala, the same glittering event where Daniel Harrington would soon stand, mocking her name, Alexander insisted she attended his side. "You belong in those rooms, Elena," he said firmly. "It's not because of me, but because of you. It's time they see what I've already seen." Elena hesitated. Memories of the last gala she had attended years earlier with Daniel resurfaced, the whispered judgments, the cold dismissal, the sense of being out of place. But Alexander's gaze steadied her. "Do not fear the rooms that once rejected you," he told her. "Enter them as the woman you've become, not the woman they remember." And so, dressed in a gown she had chosen not for its price, but for the way it echoed her own designs, Elena prepared to walk into the ballroom once more. Not as Daniel's overlooked wife, not as a dreamer dismissed as foolish, but as Elena Morales, founder of Morales Treasures. The woman whose fragile yet unbreakable spirit had turned sketches into a global brand. The night was waiting, and destiny was about to collide with arrogance in the most spectacular way. The shattered ego, the crystal hall of the Grand Metropolitan pulsed with the rhythm of high society at its most extravagant. The chandeliers glimmered brighter now, casting cascades of light across gowns stitched in Paris, suits tailored in Milan, and jewels that seemed to hum with their own vanity. Laughter rose and fell like a practiced symphony, punctuated by the clink of crystal and the murmur of billion-dollar deals disguised as casual conversation. For Daniel Harrington, this was his throne room. He stood at the center of it, confident, commanding, his voice a blade slicing through admiration and envy alike. He told his stories with practiced flourish, regaled his circle with courtroom victories, and painted himself as the architect of success. Each chuckle, each nod, each whispered compliment was another brick in the golden citadel he had built around his ego. And then Alexander Royce entered. The room shifted instantly, as though gravity itself had reoriented. Conversation stuttered into silence. Eyes widened, shoulders straightened. The billionaire's presence moved like a tide through the hall, washing away Daniel's momentary spotlight and redirecting every beam of admiration toward the silver-haired man who needed no introduction. Royce did not strut, did not demand attention. He simply walked, tall and measured, his gaze cutting through the crowd with quiet authority. And every person present, whether they admitted it or not, leaned instinctively toward him, their bodies betraying their awe. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, his breath grow shallow. This was the man whose approval he had fantasized about, the figure whose recognition could crown a career. But as Royce moved through the room, Daniel realized with dawning horror that the billionaire's steps were not leading toward the stage, nor toward the hosts waiting eagerly to greet him. They were aimed directly at the silent auction tables at the woman Daniel had just mocked before half the hall. Alina Morales turned at the sound of his approach, and when her eyes met Alexander's, her entire face lit with a warmth so radiant that it seemed to silence even the string quartet. Daniel's heart froze as the billionaire reached for her hand. Bowing slightly, pressing his lips to her fingers with a tenderness that sent a visible ripple through the crowd. "Forgive me for being late, my love," Alexander said, his voice carrying with the weight of intimacy, not performance. The meeting took longer than expected. Elena's laughter, genuine, unforced, rose into the air like the first notes of a melody. "You know, I don't need these spectacles," she replied softly, though her words carried easily to the watching crowd. "I was hoping to disappear into the artwork." "Impossible," Alexander murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are far too extraordinary to disappear anywhere." And with that, the fragile scaffolding of Daniel's ego cracked. The champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of glittering shards. Heads turned sharply at the sound, and suddenly, the circle of admirers who had laughed at his cruel jokes moments before were staring not at Alina, not at Royce, but at Daniel, the man who had declared her irrelevant, mocked her as pathetic, dismissed her as destined for mediocrity. Their expressions, once alight with laughter, now bore the stunned disbelief of witnesses watching the ground shift beneath them. Cassandra's manicured nails dug into his arm. Her whisper urgent and sharp. "Daniel, is that really her? With him?" But Daniel could not answer. His throat was dry, his chest tight, his mind scrambling for explanations that dissolved before they formed. The hosts hurried to the stage, voices quivering with delight as they welcomed the guest of honor. "Ladies and gentlemen," one announced, "we are privileged tonight to have with us Mr. Alexander Royce, whose generosity has shaped industries and supported countless causes. He joins us this evening not only as a patron, but with someone very dear to his heart." The spotlight shifted, casting its glow directly on Elena. Whispers rippled through the hall. Names hissed from mouth to ear. Alina Morales, the designer. The one behind those new collections in Royce's luxury hotels. The brand everyone is talking about. The truth unfolded in waves, reaching even those at the back of the ballroom who craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the woman at Alexander's side. Daniel felt heat climb his neck, his vision narrowing. This couldn't be happening. It had to be coincidence, some cruel joke, a twist of fate designed to humiliate him. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The billionaire's hand rested at the small of Elena's back with the ease of a man deeply familiar, his gaze protective, his affection unguarded. The crowd did not doubt. They saw what Daniel refused to accept. Alina was not here as a guest, not as an ornament. She was here as an equal. Alexander took the microphone. His voice steady and commanding, the kind of voice that silenced entire boardrooms and swayed governments. "I am honored to be here tonight," he began, not merely as a supporter of the arts, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand the power of believing in talent that the world too often overlooks. His eyes swept across the room, pausing for just a breath on Daniel before returning to Alina. 6 months ago, I discovered a designer whose work stunned me. Jewelry, not of mere ornament, but of meaning. Pieces that carried stories, that captured resilience, that transformed the ordinary into something eternal. That designer is here tonight, Lina Morales, founder of Morales Treasures. Applause erupted, thunderous and unrestrained. The same hands that had clapped Daniel's back hours earlier now came together in praise for the woman he had dismissed. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled furiously, socialites leaned forward to catch every word. Alina stepped to the microphone, her hands steady, her voice clear though her heart raced. "Thank you," she began, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Not long ago I was told that my dreams were foolish, that my art had no place in the real world, that I was destined for failure. There were nights when I almost believed it. But I stand here tonight because I refuse to let those voices drown out the one inside me that said, 'Keep creating, keep believing.' Every piece I design carries a story of struggle and hope, and tonight, I share them not for profit, but as a reminder that beauty and meaning can endure even in the harshest of storms." Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to every cynic in the room. The applause swelled again, louder this time, echoing off the chandeliers until the hall seemed to tremble. Daniel stood frozen, his ears ringing, his chest hollow. Around him, the circle that had once laughed at his jokes now shifted uncomfortably. Their gazes avoiding his, their loyalty evaporating like mist. Cassandra's smile had curdled into a grimace, her grip on his arm loosening as though she no longer wished to be tethered to him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt small. Not because of the wealth on display, not because of the powerful figures surrounding him, but because the one person he had belittled, mocked, and discarded now stood above him, not in spite of her dreams, but because of them. And in that ballroom, under the unforgiving light of truth, Daniel Harrington's golden citadel finally collapsed. The lesson of true worth, the thunderous applause, lingered even after Alina stepped down from the stage, its echoes carrying across. It's a vast marble hall like the aftermath of a storm that had swept away everything false and left only truth glistening. In its wake, she walked back to Alexander's side with calm composure, her chin lifted, her dark hair catching the light in waves. To the crowd, she was no longer the woman Daniel Harrington once mocked as a failure. Artist who had defied dismissal and built beauty out of perseverance. At her side, Alexander Royce's presence was not a shield, not the crutch of a powerful man, but a confirmation of her own worth. His quiet pride radiated as he offered her his arm, and together they moved through the sea of admirers, leaving. Behind whispers of awe and envy, Daniel, by contrast, felt as though the ground had opened beneath him. The applause that filled the hall was a roar in his ears, but it was not for him. The circle of friends who had once hung on his every boast now drifted away. Their smiles redirected toward Alina, their curiosity pivoted toward Alexander. Their eyes, when they glanced back at Daniel, carried not admiration but pity or worse, amusement. His earlier words, sharp and cruel, played in his mind like echoes in a cavern, pathetic, childish, destined for mediocrity. Each one now turned back on him, each one another crack in the brittle armor of his ego. Cassandra's hand, once so firmly looped through his arm, now lay limp against him. Her smile was gone, replaced with tight-lipped calculation. She leaned, close her whisper a blade against his pride. "Daniel, you made a fool of yourself. Everyone heard what you said about her. And now look, she's standing with Alexander Royce. Do you realize what this does to your reputation?" He turned to her in desperation, searching for comfort, for loyalty. But her eyes were cold, her gaze already scanning the crowd for the next opportunity, the next anchor to tie herself to. Cassandra had never been with him for love. She had been there for the image, for the access, for the lifestyle. And now that image was cracked, that lifestyle threatened. She recoiled from him, as though failure were contagious. When he tried to tighten his grip on her arm, she pulled away smoothly, smiling toward a group of socialites, as if she had never belonged to him at all. The humiliation seared deeper than any courtroom defeat Daniel had ever known. His world, meticulously constructed of victories and appearances, had never seemed so fragile, he realized, with a cold clarity that cut sharper than any insult. That he had built his empire not on truth, but on the perception of power. And perception, fickle and ruthless, was slipping through his fingers in real time, across the ballroom. Elena's laughter carried softly, mingling with the music as she greeted guests, who now clamored to meet her. She accepted their compliments, With grace, her words warm, her smile genuine. At once did she glance toward Daniel. At once did she seek to gloat or to rub salt into the wounds of his humiliation. Her silence toward him was not avoidance, it was dismissal. Oh, she had transcended the world where his opinion mattered. Whoa, to her he no longer existed. Daniel stood alone, the shards of his broken glass still glinting at his feet. Remembered with a sudden, gutting ache the nights he had walked past her sketches without looking. The mornings he had brushed off her stories of new designs, the cruel words he had wielded like weapons against her passion. He had not discarded a burden, as he had once told himself. He had discarded a treasure, and now the world could see it clearly. While he was left with nothing but the hollow echo of his own arrogance, the gala surged on around him, the chatter, the music, the celebration. But for Daniel, everything moved in a blur. He could not hear. The string quartet could not taste the champagne he poured to steady his shaking hands, could not summon the charm that had once made him untouchable. Cassandra drifted away entirely, her laughter ringing from another corner of the hall where she had already attached herself to a different circle of influence. His allies, once eager, now kept their distance. He was a man undone not by scandal or loss of wealth, but by the exposure of his own pettiness. Meanwhile, Alexander and Alina prepared to leave. The billionaire's Bentley waited outside, its sleek frame gleaming beneath the portico lights. It's a very symbol of prestige that Daniel had once wielded as proof of his superiority. As Alexander held the door for her, Alina turned her face upward, the faintest smile touching her lips. The cameras flashed, capturing her in that moment of triumph, not as a trophy wife, not as an accessory to a powerful man, but as a woman who had fought for her dream and won. She did not look back. She had no need to. Her life was no longer tethered to the man who had dismissed her. Her story had outgrown him, her worth defined not by his cruelty, but by her own courage. The Bentley pulled away slowly, its taillights glowing like embers fading into the night, carrying Alina toward a future she had carved with her own hands. Daniel watched from the ballroom's entrance, reflection fractured in the glass doors. For the first time in years, saw not the image he had tried so desperately to project, but the truth of the man he had become, small, bitter, and empty. He thought of all the chances he had to encourage, to nurture, to believe in the woman who had once loved him. Instead, he had chosen arrogance. And arrogance had left him standing alone, surrounded by wealth yet impoverished in everything that mattered. The night ended not with his victory, but with Elena's quiet triumph. And though she never once sought revenge, her very existence, radiant fulfilled, became the most powerful rebuke of all. The lesson hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. True worth is not measured by money, status, or applause. True worth is forged in perseverance, in faith when others mock, in the courage to keep creating beauty even when the world calls it foolish. Daniel had chosen to mock, and now he lived in the ruins of his own arrogance. Alina had chosen to believe, and now she thrived in the abundance of her own truth. For those who watched from the corners of the Crystal Hall, for those who whispered about the story long after the gala ended, the moral was clear. The world may sneer at dreamers, but one day those same dreamers might return with their heads high, their hearts strong, and their names spoken with respect that money cannot buy. And so, the story closed not with Daniel's voice, but with Elena's unspoken grace, a reminder to every soul in that glittering hall, and to all who would one day hear her name, that the measure of a life is not what is mocked in the moment, but what endures in the end.